Ladies, gentlemen, outlaws, we welcome you to this session, and this is panel 19. When I was a kid, the teacher told me the black folk, but we didn't say black folk, we said colored people, had no history. And I would sit in my seat and fume because I knew that we had some history because the elders in my community told us. And I also walked on the grounds of history. What you're about to experience is taking folklore and documenting it so that it is accepted as legitimate history. I grew up on the grounds of Macedonia Missionary Baptist Church on the hilltop above Burlington, Ohio. We went every summer and every fall for basket day and often a revival. And I heard all the stories about the freed people who came long before the Civil War even started, the lanterns that they carried and the hooks that they placed those lanterns on to provide illumination for themselves. I knew the story was true. I grew up with the Hales and the Pleasants and the Gordons. I knew that they were telling the stories that their ancestors had told them. And now today, we'd like to share the story and the documentation of that story with you. Roll. No, no.
I'm working on it. Hold on one second.
Okay.
Sorry. It's that there's that one little button there that you have to click every single time, and I keep missing it.
As a child in Ironton, Ohio, textbooks taught me about the owners of the local pig iron furnaces who were abolitionists and Underground Railroad conductors. There were numerous free African Americans in Southern Ohio. Their run in states was not taught or praised. Those were the people I came from. Without an Underground Railroad story, where did I fit in this history of my country? I grew up attending Basket Day Homecoming up Macedonia Hill at the Mother Church, founded by the famous 37 freedmen from the Twyman Plantation in Madison County, Virginia. These same people created the Providence Anti-Slavery League, which became the oldest association of black Baptist churches west of the Appalachian Mountains. My father, the Reverend Dr. D.C. Carter, spent 43 years pastoring one of Macedonia's daughters, the First Baptist Church of Burlington, and served in the senior leadership of the association, learning the histories of all the member churches. Since my people came out of Appomattox, Virginia, I assumed my family had stories about escaping, but neither my father nor his father could tell me so. Being a colored hillbilly in the 50s was particularly hard, especially since slavery seemed to be the only history accorded to African Americans. I started digging, and I found the answer. I am a child of iron. My father's great-grandfather, Hiram Carter, was a blacksmith and made wagon wheels in Buckingham County, Virginia. Perhaps his value as a blacksmith meant he chose to stay south. His grandsons Willie and Jimmy were recruited by the C&O Railroad for their ironworking skills. They helped build the roundhouse in Russell, Kentucky. Perhaps it was my grandfather Willie's fate to remain in southern Ohio, so his son and my father Douglas could be the keeper of the legacy of the 37, restore the cemetery that holds their bones, and be the touchstone for the county's African American history. Perhaps the small county hamlets called Black Fork, Aid, Getaway, and Bidwell were clues. The current congregants of Providence's rural black Baptist churches say their ancestors hid and transported freedom seekers. So while my family may have no Underground Railroad story, we do have an Overland Railroad story. And we're history keepers. That's where I fit. I hold and honor my father's legacy. the right and the responsibility to know and tell my people's story on the landscape of northern Appalachia. Thank you. Thank you very much, Natalie, for working out the kinks to make that happen. So now I'd like to present Jessica Lucas, who is our researcher on this team, and she'll talk about documenting the lives of the people who started the great church we call the Mother Church, Mother Macedonia. Jessica.
Thank you so much. Should I try to share my presentation again, or will you just put the slides up, Miss Natalie?
I'm happy to do it if you would like.
I can try one last time, but if it doesn't work,
okay. Give it a shot.
Anything?
No.
Okay. All right. If you could help me with that, that would be great. Well, thank you, everyone. It's an honor to be here and to share with you some of my research on Macedonia Church and Macedonia Free Black Settlement in Lawrence County, Ohio.
Are you seeing your slides?
Yes, I do. Thank you so much. And if you could advance to the next slide already, that would be great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was a discussion on social media that actually tipped me head first into my dedicated research efforts. Someone was discussing the need to get Lawrence County, Ohio's Underground Railroad sites listed and recognized. I eagerly chimed in that we should begin with Macedonia since it was an important stop. There's no proof of that, someone said. It's only folklore with no truth, someone else argued. Macedonia's historical marker explains that Macedonia was a safe haven for escaped and freed slaves, but stops short of saying that it was an Underground Railroad site. In a conversation with Macedonia descendant Mr. James Hale about the church's history, he mentioned that Macedonia was a stop on the Underground Railroad. So why wasn't the site recognized nationally? Heck, even locally celebrated and honored. Next slide, please. Cursory searches revealed that Voices of Macedonia still existed, sharing Macedonia's stories, seeking assistance to preserve the history and artifacts before forever lost. Mr. Calvin Vinson, Macedonia descendant, proudly spoke of Macedonia's Underground Railroad involvement, featured in several newspaper articles. And it was as I was reading one of these articles that I came across the words of Amope Deboiku, who discussed Macedonia's history keepers and the willingness that they would have to share the truth of Macedonia if only folks would listen. Next slide, please. So in the midst of a global pandemic, I began my research of Macedonia with determination. And I was dismayed upon beginning my examination to encounter a whitewashing of the local Underground Railroad history. What seemed to exist in our local history was a denial of Black agency, even in the struggle for their own freedom. A troubling belief that if they didn't have the help of white folks, if white folks weren't leading the efforts, then Underground Railroad efforts couldn't and wouldn't have happened at all. In fact, I even encountered a local researcher who flat out told me that Macedonia was not involved and that her people couldn't have been part of the Underground Railroad. Now, from a theoretical perspective, as someone coming from an academic background in human rights, I was acutely aware that the erasure of a group's identity, which is intricately linked to exclusion from regional history and history telling, is often used, even in seemingly harmless ways, in attempts to strip groups of their humanity, power, sense of meaning, and belonging. So knowing all of this and knowing Macedonia's oral history existed, I pushed on. Next slide, please. I was guided to Miss Deonda Johnson, our region's Underground Railroad Network to Freedom liaison. Preliminary discussions with Ms. Johnson focused on the importance of having Macedonia designated as a Network to Freedom site. This application process is understandably rigorous, and all sites listed must have a verifiable connection to the Underground Railroad. Ms. Johnson gave me hope as she revealed that she herself, a seasoned historian, used to research our region's Underground Railroad, and she believed Macedonia was indeed involved. So my task was to research and document Macedonia's direct involvement. The best way to begin this process was to take bits of Macedonia's history found in local folklore and oral history, and then use it as a guide to locate historical records. Next slide, please. So I immersed myself in the treasured oral history of Macedonia's descendants, recorded in varying formats, including an interview with a mope on the phone. And then I dove into every other source I could access. I read Dr. Fain's Race, River, and the Railroad, Eldridge's Freedom Lies Across the River, Miller's piece on African American resistance to slavery in Ohio, and LaRoche's Free Black Communities and the Underground Railroad, and many more secondary sources. Next slide, please. I examined Wilbur Siebert's collection and history of the Underground Railroad movement. I was able to access manumission, census, tax, church, and providence records. And Macedonia's folklore, even early on, seemed to be confirmed by historical records. Next slide, please. I began to realize just how remarkable Macedonia truly was and truly is. Macedonia is the first recorded Black church in what is now the state of Ohio. It is the only antebellum Black church still in existence in the state of Ohio. And not only that, Macedonia birthed several other Black churches throughout our local region, thus earning the title Mother Church. Next slide, please. This brief timeline of Macedonia shows us various groups of emancipated people migrating to Macedonia from Kentucky and Virginia years before the Civil War, and the organization of the church itself, meeting in the early 1790s and officially organizing by 1813, fledging a regional Providence association as early as 1830. Next slide, please. And as we analyze stories of Macedonia's involvement in the Underground Railroad, it is crucial to watch the development of Macedonia's settlement. What develops is not only an ever-growing congregation for Macedonia Church, but a large, thriving, free Black settlement surrounding the church, an oasis for free Blacks and those escaping slavery. As early as 1818, Macedonia settlers owned their own land all around where they worshiped. And as you'll see, they continued to purchase land, and Macedonia settlement continued to grow and strengthen. Next slide, please. This land ownership, evidenced by and recorded in deeds, wills, and tax records, swiftly debunks not only the myth of Black invisibility in our region's history, but also completely refutes stereotypes of Black dependence, powerlessness, a lack of ownership, and a lack of free will in this antebellum time period. It also solidified a network of residents who aided those fleeing slavery on the Underground Railroad. Here we see Macedonia settler Rosanna Bryant, a Black woman, owning her land in current-day Lawrence County, Ohio, as early as 1818. Next slide, please. This next record will be the record of Ben Johnson, land ownership in 1830. It's important to note that Ben Johnson was the father of Gabriel Johnson, known Underground Railroad agent in our region, and they all resided at Macedonia at this time, confirmed by census records. Next slide, please. In 1833, Daniel Moores, Pleasant Roberts, and William Reed, all Macedonia settlers, all black men, all owned their land. Next slide, please. Pleasant Roberts is seen here, well, in the next slide, seen purchasing more land at Macedonia settlement. I'm going to be kind of zipping through these. Next slide, please. Yep, there we go. Here, Underground Railroad agent Gabriel Johnson himself is recorded owning land at Macedonia in the year 1850. Next slide, please. Macedonia minister Essex Harris is recorded purchasing land in 2 deeds. And this is important to note because, as I'll discuss, ministers played an important role in Macedonia's Underground Railroad work. Next slide, please. In this deed, Macedonia settlers paid, well, in the next slide, Macedonia settlers are seen paying $6,000 for their land. And then we'll flip again to the next slide, which is a fuller version. Yes, this one here, the fuller version of the land purchase bought 640 acres of land in 1849. Not only was this large land purchase remarkable, previous slide, please. These individuals were also equipped with money, clothing, tools, farm equipment, farm animals, and other provisions that helped secure and establish an already thriving Macedonia as autonomous and self-reliable. This autonomous settlement laid the foundation and a grid for potential safe houses and other assistance for those traveling the Underground Railroad. So what you see here is a portion of Fayette Township map, and this gives us a look as to where those initial land purchases were strategically made, all around and to the north of Macedonia Church, right where the Underground Railroad trails would have led escapees. Next slide, please. The specific location of the church and the settlement is crucial to clarifying and verifying stories of Macedonia's involvement in the Underground Railroad. Located up on Macedonia Ridge, it was in an advantageous location for freedom seekers. It was on the northern side of the Ohio River from Virginia and from Kentucky, the river boundary dividing the southern slave states from northern free territory. And at this section of the river at that time, the water was only 3 to 5 feet deep, and a sandbar existed. So these conditions made it even more possible, although always risky, for refugees to cross over to Macedonia. Next slide, please. Macedonia Ridge provided some safety, a lookout for approaching slave catchers and other threats, and is fabled to have allowed for coded songs, whistles, and lantern messages that could be seen and heard by freedom seekers approaching in the valley below. Macedonia had at least 3 established and evidenced Underground Railroad routes running to and from it. Once arriving at Macedonia, one could change into dry clothing after crossing the river, rub onion on the bottoms of the feet to throw the scent of slave catcher dogs, receive a place to hide or a meal to fuel up for the journey still ahead from many of the settlers on Macedonia Ridge. Next slide, please. So tracing Macedonia Church's history also allows us to document the organization of her people as a central site for socio-political power, collaboration, agency. The church was at once a social hall, a schoolhouse, an adult education center where reading and writing, among other things, were taught, courthouse where they settled community issues, and it was also the central communication hub and worship site. As these settlers defined and demonstrated their rights and independence at Macedonia, they were at the same time fighting for the rights of others and freedom for others with their frontline work on the Underground Railroad. Next slide, please. Macedonian ministers provide a glimpse into how everything was connected, not to mention how the communication at that time traveled between Black communities and congregations. Macedonia's own Reverend Thomas Walker Fry was involved in the Underground Railroad by way of messaging, warning of slave catcher gangs, procuring aid and moving supplies around the area, and possibly escorting folks from Quaker Bottom and Red Hill, which is the Proctorville, Ohio area of today, to Macedonia and beyond. Next slide, please. Reverends William Stewart, Thomas Stewart, and Macedonia leader John J. Stewart were also instrumental in the Underground Railroad. They were all documented in Siebert, leading freedom seekers through the woods from Macedonia to other Underground Railroad stations north, including Poke Patch. Next slide, please. Gabriel Johnson, the known Underground Railroad agent and Macedonia resident, is in Siebert specifically mentioning Macedonia, the Stewarts, and their work aiding freedom seekers, again confirming oral tradition. Next slide, please. And this is more from the Siebert collection. This again mentions the Stewarts, but it also goes on to mention other families at Macedonia who had connections to Poke Patch, which was another Underground Railroad station, including the Cokers, who were known Underground Railroad agents at that time. Next slide, please. So many at Macedonia were known to assist freedom seekers, including those I've already mentioned, but also including Agent Philip Lynch, the Craddock family, Agent James Ditcher, and more. So just imagine at this time when things were had to keep things secret, how many undocumented stories of Macedonia's involvement there must be. Next slide, please. And this is just a view when she flips to the next slide of Wilbur Siebert's own map based on the testimonies he recorded of Underground Railroad routes. And you'll see one in southern Ohio going right through where Macedonia would have been, is located. Next slide, please. Upon completion of Macedonia's Network to Freedom nomination and documenting evidence of its involvement in the Underground Railroad, I knew there were still many other stories of Macedonia's ancestors that could be traced and verified through historical records. So I began exploring the original burial site of Macedonia and began its Ohio Historical Marker nomination. Next slide, please. There were tales of soldiers who may have been living at the settlement, and headstones marked USCT indicated that United States colored troops who fought in the Civil War were indeed buried at Macedonia Cemetery. And I did find evidence of soldiers buried there. Yet as I accessed historical records, I discovered that some of the troops were resting there without proper headstones, and some were not included in local cemetery records. So I continued to examine soldier records, death certificates, the surviving soldier census, pension records, and so on. Next slide, please. It was through this effort that I discovered that at least 15 United States colored troops that we know of are resting at Macedonia Cemetery. So yeah, I just want to honor them here for a moment. So I've listed their names there. And then I will be kind of flipping through these next slides fairly quickly, just a heads up. I'll rest on this one for a moment, the next one. Next slide. So examining records, I realized how many of Macedonia's soldiers actually fought for the 5th Regiment, which was Ohio's first Black regiment permitted to fight in the Civil War. The 5th is distinguished with medals of honor recognized for its significant role and action at the Battle of Chaffin's Farm at New Market Heights. Macedonia's troops represent another fight for freedom, a freedom they fought for against discrimination that lingered in Ohio, fought for inside a military that wouldn't at first allow them to fight and held racist beliefs about them and their abilities as men and soldiers, which they swiftly defied and proved false, and fought for despite the inferior weaponry, leadership, and medical staff that was provided to them at that time. All right, now we'll kind of flip through quickly. Next slide, please. But I want to show you some of the historical documents that I found for these soldiers. So the first slide you'll see is Soldier Redden Turner. You'll see USCT 5th. He was a Macedonia resident. Next slide. Then we'll actually see the deed of emancipation for the same soldier, Redden Turner's father, George, from Harlan County, Kentucky, just before they migrated to Macedonia settlement. So that'll be on the next slide. It's a really cool document from Harlan County. Yep, there it is. That's the actual deed of emancipation for the soldier's father, George, just before they moved to Macedonia settlement. Okay, so quickly to the next slide. Sorry for the quickness. Let's see, back one, John Brassfield, and then William Stewart, and we'll just keep ticking along. Then we've got Soldier Stewart, Alan Howard. Yep, there's Alan, Soldier Howard, yes. And then we've got the burial report for Soldier James Wright. And lastly, next slide, please, the death certificate of Soldier Aaron Shelton, which clearly indicates his burial at Macedonia at the bottom there. So next slide, please. Illuminating yet another struggle for freedom endured by Macedonians, the Polly family is also buried here and lived at Macedonia. I'd heard many stories and conversations with Polly descendant Mr. James Hale, who's also a Macedonia descendant, and wanted to document those historical records. The Pollys moved here in 1849. In 1850, a mob of white men assaulted their home at Macedonia and kidnapped 7 of their children, forcing them across the river where they were sold into slavery. One was only an infant and had been freeborn at Macedonia. A long legal battle ensued to save the children and to bring them home. Nelson Polly did not survive this fight. He died while he was enslaved. And although the Emancipation Proclamation effectively ended court proceedings and allowed the Pollys to return home 14 years after their brutal abduction from Macedonia, a determined family effort continued to make it official and set the historical record straight that the Pollys who were sold into slavery were indeed free people who had been unlawfully kidnapped from the state of Ohio. Next slide, please. As I meticulously researched the Polly family members and the vital records, I realized some of them weren't listed on existing cemetery records, and including William Henderson Polly, whose death certificate you see here, whose father, Peyton Polly, was the father of the children kidnapped. So this is one of the siblings of the kidnapped Polly children from Southern Ohio. His death certificate here shows the Macedonia burial, but he was not included in local cemetery records. Next slide, please. As I added Polly names to the compilation I was working on and continued to trace family connections, I realized it wasn't just Polly family members missing from records. Many Macedonia folks were missing from records, so I continued documenting. Next slide, please. I pored over the vital records and found many more burials, some who lived at Macedonia their whole life, some who'd lost their children to stillbirths or lung fever, some who lost their battles with diseases, but some who lived at Macedonia until they were 100 years old, who taught school at Macedonia, were doctors, blacksmiths, barbers, some who farmed their own land. Next slide, please. So the outcomes of the research and documentation included the National Park Service Network to Freedom program listing for Macedonia and an Ohio historical marker honoring those buried at Macedonia. Next slide. Further outcomes were documented evidence, as we've talked about, of the settlement, the soldiers buried there, and a comprehensive cemetery compilation and a compilation of historic documents. And next slide. So the first Black church in Ohio, the only antebellum Black church still existing in Ohio, and an active Underground Railroad site. Evidence and artifacts of a thriving free Black settlement, and yet Macedonia is still endangered, incredibly endangered. Macedonia was listed as one of Ohio's most endangered sites for 2020, and it was nominated for America's most endangered historic places in 2021. So this powerful beacon of freedom and hope, next slide please, is at great risk of disappearing. And the church is beginning to deteriorate, effects of time and weather, but it does still stand. In working towards anti-racism, next slide please, we must reject and critically examine the whitewashing of history telling. We must resist using and supporting a white lens when interpreting, documenting, and archiving local Underground Railroad history and stories of Black resistance and efforts for freedom, self-determination, and equality in Appalachia. We must reject the insidious ideological superstructure which seeps its way into history keeping and history telling, with mechanisms attempting to erase Black agency, stories, and voices. Denying Macedonia's history or appropriating their efforts for freedom are only elements which work to maintain and uphold a system of oppression. Suppression and amnesia of the past, or certain elements of the past, are mechanisms we must be critically aware of and practices we must actively end. Next slide, please. And I know I'm running out of time. So next slide just shows you that if we don't document these experiences, we cannot write about them, teach about them, or bring the understanding they supply to our collective awareness. So it's for this reason we must take folklore to documented fact and act with urgency to save Macedonia and archive her materials. This is where we actually have the power to bring real change. Documenting and artifact preservation, along with education, can directly combat historical amnesia, denial, and erasure of Black stories and lived experiences. And this is a quote from Susan Spencer, who's telling us never to give up. And then last slide. Next slide and last slide. So now we, as scholars, archivists, researchers, and historians, I want to wait till I can see the settlers. There we go. Have a mandate, a duty, and a moral obligation to never give up this effort, to keep on working together to preserve and protect Macedonia Church, her land, her artifacts, her oral history, and the archives that are evidence of these remarkable pioneers and this thriving historical Black settlement in Lawrence County, Ohio, so that their contributions, and their legacy in Appalachia are lifted up and never forgotten. Thank you. Miss Amope, you're on mute still.
Mope, you're muted.
My bad
Muted.
for the jiggy. Thank you. And I'll now say thank you, Jessica, for such a wonderful, in-depth exploration and explanation of the history of the Macedonia settlement. And now introducing my buddy and across the pond neighbor, Dr. Cicero Fain.
Wow, Jessica. You know, it just makes me think, I wish I had you in my pocket, my corner, when I was researching the book, because sheesh, that was comprehensive and just so well done. And I look forward to work. We've worked together briefly. We're going to continue to work together, and hopefully Miss O and I and Jessica, we can all get together and do these things. I'm going to shift the lens a little bit. I mean, I can in no way, shape, or fashion follow what Jessica just did. I'm going to shift the lens a little bit to kind of talk about the impact of the Providence, and I'm going to need, is it Natalie to help me out? I'm going to shift the lens a little bit from the Providence Anti-Slavery Missionary Baptist Association. And there we go, to the Providence Regular Missionary Baptist Association. And Natalie, what I'm going to need to do, unfortunately, because I had a link that was embedded in the first slide, but I cannot, a video link. Am I able to shift? Are you able to shift control to me so I can show that this 3 minute, 2.5 minute video?
Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
I can unshare my screen. Hold on just 1 second.
Okay.
And then you'll have to share your screen.
Okay.
Okay, you should be able to share your screen now.
And how does one see this? I'm new at the with the Teams. Is it open share tray?
Yes.
Okay.
And then make sure you turn on computer. There's like a little slide there that says share audio, share computer audio. Make sure you flip that and then
Okay.
click on the screen you want to
Include
share.
system audio.
Uh-huh.
Gotcha. Okay, here we go. Can folks see this?
I
can
am
see
so
it.
glad
Yeah.
that you're invoking Skip and his recent PBS special.
There we
Couldn't
go.
squeeze
Yes,
it in the
good.
intro. God is
That's
good.
okay. Okay.
After so many years' distance from it, I'd finally come to understand more fully the meaning and the magic of the black church.
Oh, my girl. I made it. Hi. This is where my life in the church started.
We had one of
I
them.
was 12 years old, and it was Sunday, and Mama hugged me, and she told me she was going to die. And they took her to the hospital. So I went upstairs in my bedroom. I didn't tell anybody. I just prayed. And I told Jesus that if he let my mother live, I'd give my life to Christ. Amen. About 3 days later, she got better and she came home. So I got up, looked in the mirror, and went, uh-oh. You know, I had made a deal with Jesus, you know. You don't mess with God. And I came to this church every Sunday, and I joined the choir, and I still sing all the hymns. My favorite hymn of all time was Miss Toots' The Prodigal Son. Oh, I believe I will go back home. Well, I believe I will go back home. I believe I will go back home and be a servant for the Lord. Oh my God, that is. Thank you so much for coming.
The black church was the place where our people somehow made a way out of no way. And it's the place, after a long and tiresome journey, to which we can always return and call home.
Have your cake when you come back.
Absolutely.
Okay. Would you, all right, get back. I guess I need to stop sharing.
Mhm.
Okay. Let's see. Oh,
There we go.
there we go. All righty. Um, Thank you, Natalie. Would you mind shifting to the next slide? Am I on? Natalie, are you on?
You're on, Cicero. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you're fine. Go ahead.
Go ahead and
Sorry.
shift to the next slide, please. It is not moving.
Which slide do you want it on? I have it on the map of Lawrence.
That's good. We can start there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we've already seen this, but you know, in conjunction with the, let's shift the lens a little bit. We talked about this, the impact of the church in terms of the slave era. I'm going to shift the lens a little bit and talk more about the transformation and the expansion of its cultural, theological, economic, educational, institutional, and political framework and impact. Because the Providence Missionary um, Regular Missionary Association is incredibly significant to this region, not only to southwestern Ohio, but also as the mother church and the initial association for churches in West Virginia as well. I do believe, in fact, Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky. I believe Pikeville may have these had an interest in joining it, but they were rebuffed for whatever reason. Would you mind going to the next slide, please? So we have the Providence Anti-Slavery Missionary Baptist Church Association, which Amopa and Jessica have discussed. I wanted to make the transition to the Providence Regular Missionary Baptist Association, which starts in 1833 and by 1886 comprised 18 ordained ministers and 24 licentiates. Next slide, please. And speaking of documentation, this is the 150th anniversary souvenir book of the Providence Regular Missionary Baptist Association. It is a remarkable document because it details this history. And it goes to Jessica's point about, there is a rich history that that we have as African Americans. It just needs to be sought after and elevated. The truth of the matter is, Jessica, I don't think folks realize how much work Jessica has done. It is exceedingly difficult to find documentary evidence chronicling the Black experience, especially in the antebellum era. And so I give her much credit. It took me, some of the names that you brought up there, Owen Pleasant and Susan Spencer, folks that I was fortunate to have touched base with. It could, my work could not, my book could not have been done, can be done now because some of those folks have passed on. And so it is really, I'm so fortunate and blessed to have engaged in this endeavor when I did. Next slide, please. Here's also the minutes of the 78th annual meeting of the Providence Missionary Baptist Association and Ministerial Institute, which is dated in 1913. And so these documents, these records chronicle the broad influence and innovation and scope of the Black religious presence within the tri-state area of Southwest Ohio, Southeast Ohio, Southwest Virginia, and Eastern Kentucky. Next slide, please. I'm going to get to you, Miss O. I see you.
I'm just having fun in the chat.
Yes. And so here's a record, or these are the various organizational dates of member churches. And it's remarkable. And to tell you the truth, I'm really gratified to have been invited by Miss O to be a part of this panel, and I'm also really gratified to have Skip Gates do his examination and elevation and celebration of the Black church, because it has enabled me. It has shifted my thinking on how I want to frame future research and writing. Um, and so for that, then I'm growing as a scholar, I like to say. Um, Next slide, please. This is just up to 1872, and you will see First Baptist Church of Huntington, West Virginia, which is the church that I call my church home, and that my grandfather was a deacon in. And we all of us know that Huntington became the cultural, socioeconomic engine for the Southern West Virginia from from the moment that it is founded in 1871 up through well, my book goes up to 1929, but it continues. We also see, so we continue on to 1910, and I want to ask you, Miss O, I don't know if Sabine was actually in South Point or whether it was in Ironton.
Sabine is in the bend where you cut off Charlie Creek Road, where you come off New 52.
Okay,
And
so I was right.
at one time it said Head Start CAO on it.
Yes.
But that right over there in that little creek bed was Sabine.
Okay, good. I got it right then. Next slide, please. All right, come on now. Next slide. Here it come, hopefully. It was there because we saw it, and then it disappeared. You okay, Natalie? Is it not working? Well, hopefully it'll come up. What the next slide will show is that I have the moderators, a listing of the moderators of the Providence Anti-Slavery Missionary Baptist Association, and then it shifts over to the Providence Regular Missionary Baptist Association, and I have a listing of. Sorry.
See it?
No, I cannot.
I'm sorry, I can see it. I think there must be lag. There's some
Yeah.
kind of lag between our screens.
Okay. Okay. Well, I have a listing. What essentially I have is a listing of moderators from 1863 all the way up to 1977. There we go. Thank you. And if you could perhaps enlarge it, maybe, I don't know if you can. That was probably my fault. But at least you get a sense of the historical scope, hopefully, of the association. And as I said, starting from 1863 up through 1977, this association was operative, and especially important. I was going to ask Jessica or Mope if you know that if there was Ivy Bryant was any relation to George Bryant, who was in the cemetery.
Yes.
Okay, was a father or?
I'm not. It's either his father or his granddad.
Okay. Okay.
But I.V. Bryant was one of the moderators of Providence.
Yeah, right. So, you know, the tentacles, these connections are just so, um, man, goosebump material. Really. Um, it it has Nelson Barnett, who was very key to my study on Black Huntington, because he was one of the first migrants into the city,
Mm-hmm.
and made an indelible imprint upon Black Huntington. Um, and in fact, he between 1884 and 1884 and 1888, he was the both he and Ivy Bryant were pastors, um, and were Barnett presided over the pastorate at the Macedonia, which of course he acknowledged as the preeminent black church of the region. Barnett and Bryant's and even Riddle's um, influence throughout the community, both on both sides of the river, on communities, I should say, on both sides of the river, is incredible. Barnett, for at one point in time between 1877 and 1880, officiated 26 of the 46 black marriages in Huntington, comprising 50%, 57% of the total. Ivy Bryant served as a pastor in a number of churches on both sides of the river. Um, he was regarded, and in fact, I just came up with a. Not only was he a man of immense religious stature, but he also was a man of immense courage. At one point, the records talk to him, show him interceding on the behalf of a black man who's about to be lynched, and he took on the white prospective lynchers and talked them down from that lynching, and that is not a position I would want to be in. I would imagine at that particular time, but he had you know uh, significant courage um, to do that. He would go on um, and leave and move on to larger locales, and becoming the pastor. Um, he would leave the area in 1888 and become the pastor of Walker Memorial Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. Now, at a certain point in time, um, the associations are going to expand. And I also want to get to the fact that Reverend P.O. Wright, I don't know if folks can see it, P.O. Wright served as a moderator for 38 years, a remarkable tenure. And did you say that you knew Reverend Lee L.V. Goss?
Not only did I know Reverend Gauls, his son Levi and I grew up in Providence together. We went to Summer Institute every year. We went round and round the county, and you know, it was a courtship circuit. Providence
Wow.
summer
Yeah.
meetings were. So, matter of fact, it was Reverend Gauls who told me that my job was to be a storyteller and tell this story. So I
Wow.
give a shout out to Reverend Gauls. He's one of my big people in heaven.
Yes, yes. Next slide, please. So, of course, we cannot forget the women who contributed mightily to the church as well as to the communities. You will see, oh, sorry, go back. You will see one particular lady from 1982 and 1983, Mrs. June Carter. Miss O, when do you want to talk about her?
I'd be delighted to speak about my mother. My mother grew up in Ironton, but my father took the pastorate at First Baptist Burlington my first year of college. So that would have been 1970, 71. They traveled back and forth from Ironton to Burlington until Burlington was ready to give them a residence. My mother had been trained to the piano at the age of 4. and she was famous throughout the entire tri-state region for what she could do in the gospel tone with the piano. And they elected her that president role in the years that she was ill, because she passed away the April of 1983. So I am just delighted to see her name listed in your archives.
Mm, mm. Well, I'm happy to. It is such, it's serendipitous for sure. Um, that these connections, these intersections are occurring. Uh,
And Miss Lula,
yes.
Miss Lula lived up in Pomeroy, and my first association meeting with the Providence School of Religion was under her. And I remember fondly she gave us a basket and told us to go pick berries, and if we picked enough, she'd make us a cobbler. That's one of my hearts right there,
Yeah.
because we grew up in that association. It was the only place you knew you could go to in the summer where you knew you weren't going to be harassed for
Mm,
anything.
mm,
The people was gonna love on you. They were gonna know you. They were gonna tell you your slip was hanging. And they really raised us. When we say we were raised in the church, we are not joking about that.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, um, I'm just so happy. This is so heartwarming. Um, it should. I want to talk about at least somewhat wrap up my section. They also held the Institute for, as alluded to earlier, ministers and deacons. They would have table talks regularly. These meetings were composed of educated ministers in the association. They were doctors. They were school teachers. They were well trained deacons. They saw the need to train others and organize them. And from this root, from the seed, roots would expand throughout the tri-state region, as I spoke about. In 1900, the ministers of Providence helped to organize the Mount Olivet Association in West Virginia. So the churches withdrew from West Virginia and Kentucky, and established their own association. Um, um, but even the program says that some of them have returned back to the fold, so to speak, um, have returned back to Providence. Um, and so, you know, in conclusion, I hope I've given you some idea of the expansive nature of of the Providence Missionary Baptist Association. It has had a direct influence upon me and my ancestors for sure. I think throughout the tri-state region, we really, the truth of the matter is, we really don't know. We're not taught the incredible impact and influence upon the black circumstance, um, uh, in the of this association in the throughout the 18th, throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. And I think this is something that I'm very proud to be and happy and delighted to be a part of this session. And I hope that this hopefully will build some fruit that we can harvest down the line a little bit. Thank you.
Ooh, thank you. You know, the ancestors is standing up in their graves, clapping. I feel them. They think they at church.
Mm.
You know, every summer I spent at Providence Missionary Baptist School of Religion. It
Wow.
was not only an opportunity to learn about the Bible, but church governance. I also learned a very valuable lesson there. I was enrolled in the speech contest that was held every year, and I was taking speech class at Ironton High School. And one thing the teacher insisted that we not thank the audience after you got finished speaking. She would take points off your grade.
Mm.
And so I was one of the contestants, me and Levi Goss, Reverend Goss' son. We were the very two last contestants. And when I got finished, I did not say thank you. And that's why I lost.
What?
And that's the first time I realized that standard American culture and Black Appalachian culture were not the same thing. that I would have won that contest if I had said, and thank you all for listening.
Wow.
But it had been trained out of me because that's not what you do when you're a scholar.
Right.
And so you can understand the emotional crucifixion trying to straddle both worlds. Because when I was coming up, we didn't know nothing about no Appalachian society. We didn't have no association. We were just black hillbillies, and we knew it. And proud to be black hillbillies, because Ironton never had segregated schools. So it wasn't like what school you gonna go to. You're gonna go to one your parents went to. And your teachers were your parents' high school graduate mates. So, it was a very unique time and a very special place. And I am so happy to be a part of the history of Lawrence County, Ohio, and the Providence Regular Missionary Baptist Church Association, which was a courtship ground for us as teenagers.
Yeah.
When our lives were centered around the church.
Right. Well, I'm not going to even go to the fact that I used to travel over across the bridge to try to courtship some of those fine sisters from Top
Fine,
Point
sister.
and Burlington. I'm going to even go there, but that's for another topic. But
Well,
yeah,
the church at that time, and going to Sunday School Baptist Convention and the association, when we stayed in each other's houses because
yes,
there
we
weren't
did.
hotels to be not welcome in. That was when courtships happened.
Yes, right.
And people started putting people together. And, I'm born in 52, so there were too many girls for not enough boys. And we knew from an early age we were going to have to look for some outsiders.
Right. I was born a little bit too many years back, I guess.
Yes,
Do
yes.
we want to are there any comments or questions out there? Because I think we end at 1:45, don't we?
Yes, we do. So we got 10 minutes and would you like to moderate that, Dr. Fain?
Sure. I mean,
Get busy then.
all right. Anyone out there have any questions or comments and contributions, personal stories to share? I mean, we welcome.
Susan Weaver says, excellent distinction. Anne and Susan are typing their little fingers into the chat. So we should see some messages come up soon. I was talking earlier about growing up in Ironton before US 52 cut the hill, and how often we went up and down that hill for personal solitude, and how our parents let us go. We thought, sometimes we said we were going to run away, and we ran all the way up the hill behind Grandpa's house and had us some stick out your tongue, roll your eyeballs moment without your parents having to watch. Okay, it says, can you talk more about what the impact of this research has been on the community in Macedonia? How have folks responded? I'll start off, and then Dr. Fain, and then Jessica. Macedonia is a memory on the landscape accompanied by the original, not the original, but one of the churches that was built in the 1800s. The community, the Black community on top of Macedonia Hill, has faded. The majority of African Americans now live in the lowlands around the hill in Burlington, South Point, Ironton, Huntington, West Virginia, Proctorville. So therefore, the work that these three people that you all see, the highlighting and sustaining and maintaining the significance of the Macedonian settlement in the history of the United States has been laid on us as a cohort. So what has been the impact of this research? How many people on this call? That's been part of it on the community, because the community as a whole no longer lives on the hilltop. Okay. Then Susan Weaver says, this is wonderful. Am I correct? There's a lot of interaction between Ironton and Huntington. And Sister Dr. Fain said, yes, you are. Matter of fact, Susan, we crossed that river back and forth like it wasn't three different states. Between Ashland, Kentucky, Ironton, Russell, Huntington, South Point, Proctorville, we all go back and forth across that river of water and not even recognize it at state lines.
Yeah.
That's how intertwined the economies are. My daddy worked at Armco for 30 some odd years in Ashland. He drove back and forth every day. Going up to Huntington was a treat, because in those days you didn't go that far to go. You didn't need to go that far to go shopping. But those association meetings brought kids from all the counties where these churches, Mother's Church had fledged these children churches, and it became a courtship ground. It became a marriage celebration opportunity. It became the opportunity to dress up and go to association meeting and be formal after you got out your dungarees. It was a wonderful experience, nurturing experience for me as a child growing up underneath the tutelage of those people.
Go ahead, Jessica, please.
Oh, you can speak on it, Dr. Fain. Before I.
Please call me Cicero, please, folks out there. Um, because Jessica and I have worked with I'm going to the Ann's question. We're still fleshing that out. About the impact on the community. Reverend Vincent. Jessica and I were. I'm involved in a project, and I don't know if it's gonna happen or not, but I'm involved in a project of trying to establish what I'm going to give the name of a Carter G. Woodson Heritage Center in Huntington. And it would be the repository and the nexus of, the Black history of the tri-state region. And one of our initial goals was to try to incorporate Macedonia Church into the physical structure of this museum and cultural center. But we realized, there's pushback. There's the physical limitations of trying to move it. There's also community resistance to relocating it. And so it's a really interesting. Jessica was the driving force for Macedonia to be recognized under the, what is it? Isn't it a federal historical site now? The National Underground Railroad site. And so because of that, it is, I think, firmly affixed where it is. I don't think it's going to be relocated. But the problem is finding the financial and physical support to keep it up and
yes.
So that's the challenge. So go ahead, please, Jessica.
Yeah, so I'll just speak to we with this work we have we as a team have received national recognition from the Network to Freedom site for Macedonia Church and the historical markers. We are now in the talks with Heritage Ohio. We will meet with them on the 16th. These are preservation efforts. I just had a call with the senator's office the other day. So we're in the works. And I think that opportunities like this to get together and talk and share the history, bring awareness, lift up the voices of Macedonia are extremely important and crucial to spreading the importance of saving this historical site. Not just the building itself, but the memory of those that were pioneers in Southern Ohio. Because as I pointed out, the tendency is to, at least in my hometown, which is near where Macedonia is located, is to kind of just, forget about the past. And I don't want to see that happen. So we are now in the talks with National Trust for Historic Preservation, things like this that will continue and keep this conversation alive and hopefully save that site and help lift up the voices of the ancestors.
Yeah, it's gonna. And Jessica and Michael, please, I don't know if you agree with this. The challenge is we've got a small group of committed people, and I don't know if that's going to be enough because we need the community to really back the venture and to show a concerted, consistent support. And that's always been a challenge when you've got significant outmigration out of the region and population loss. And it's the same, I guess, I would imagine in any, in most Black communities. You have a committed group of folk, but you need to expand that pool because it takes more resources and money and talent and energy. And I know for the folks in Huntington that I'm working with, many of them are in their late 60s, 70s, and 80s. And you're asking them to take on this enormous task, and many of them are just tired of the heavy lifting.
Well, I'm gonna ask if I can make a statement. Jessica, I'm about to out us. Do you mind?
Mm-hmm.
As I said, my dad spent 43 years in Burlington pastoring one of Macedonia's daughters. I left home as quickly as I could, but my feet were planted and I was reared in the Providence Missionary Baptist Association. I spent at least 2 events every summer on the hilltop in the old Macedonia home church. I have talked to folks in Burlington at First Baptist Burlington, which is experiencing outmigration, severe outmigration, and dwindling of the congregation as people pass on to the great beyond.
Yeah.
It is our goal to host, and through the Ohio Storytelling and West Virginia Storytelling Network, a convocation of storytelling on the grounds of the First Baptist Church Burlington. We've had conversations about that, but the economy is shifting and everybody needs to go someplace that don't cost a lot to get to. And
Yeah.
we are sitting on an extraordinarily historical artifact in Lawrence County, Ohio, that needs to be shared not only with the world, which we can do through the mechanism of the internet as we are doing today, but we need to have people walk that hallowed ground so they can truly understand the aptitude, the strength that it took during the period of enslavement to create a viable, stable community of freed people on the Ohio side of the river, whose expertise created several communities, fledged over 20 small community churches, and has sustained over 150 years this identity of being Black on the Appalachian landscape. That is a story that needs to be shared with a wider audience. And the three of us have talked about it to each other, but we're about to say it out loud here. Look forward to an opportunity to take some cultural tourism experience in Southern Ohio and Northern West Virginia. Because if we don't tell the story, it ain't gonna get told.
Yeah.
And if we don't tell this story, because I'm not in their age cohort, I'm heading towards 70 real quick. If I slip tomorrow, I'm gonna be 70 years old, okay? I got work to do. I got a legacy to leave. Because them summer education institutes, I still got the cards that say that I know how to be a Christian. Okay?
Ah, wow.
So we got to preserve this legacy before it fades off the landscape.
Here,
And
here.
with that, we are at the 45. And I expect we should say thank you all very much. Continue to look for Fane, Lucas, and Daboiku, because we are now new regional scholars and we claim the legacy of our ancestors. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Fabulous.
Thanks. This was fascinating. Appreciate it, y'all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Your
All right.
presence here, Wilburn, is
See you.
greatly appreciated.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Susan, that is the Susan.
Where is Susan?
There's
Thank
there's
you,
a Susan
Dr.
from
Okay.
Virginia too.
That's Susan Weaver. Okay, and then
Hey.
yes. All right. Thank you, ladies.
So Dr. Mead knows me. She knows what it took to get to this date and this place. Thank you for your mentorship.
Well,
Susan.
and you've got me thinking about what we need to do in my home place. We have 2 trials of freed women. They won their trials when they were and one of them was defended by Jubal Early, the Confederate general. I mean,
Yes.
think about that.
Mhm.
So we got to get young people interested and get some of that
Yeah.
research that
Yep.
Jessica's done, because we don't have it. It just
Yeah.
it looks like it's not there, but I don't believe it.
It's
So-
there. It's there, but we have to share it and we have to have that passion. And I can't, bring it into the schools, bring it into the universities, but we have to start acknowledging and lifting up. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I'm going to drop a gem because they might cut us off soon. But the musician known as John Legend
Yes.
is a Polly. He's a Polly. He is a great grandchild of the Polly family.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got to recognize. We
Yeah.
got to recognize.
Yeah.
So,
But yeah,
like
the
I said,
research exists, the evidence exists. We just have to, we have to find an outlet and a way to collaborate to start sharing the actual
yes,
truth.
the children of the Polly family, spelled Polley, and they were drug into Kentucky. And there was a whole court case, and the case is
Yep.
filed at the Lawrence County Courthouse in Ironton, Ohio,
Yeah.
about how the family had to work to get their freeborn children out of enslavement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, check out the name Indiana Choice and a play called Too Free for Me. And with a name like Indiana, you kind of wonder if maybe there's not some crossover somewhere or another. But anyway, I mean, all up and down the region. So, all right, y'all. Thank you. It's great
Thanks,
to see
everybody.
you.
Thank you, and thank you, Wilburn,
Thank
for
you,
your
Wilburn.
long-time mentorship. We love you.
Yeah.
You the fire. You the fire.
Appreciate you, brother. Appreciate you.
And your
Thank you.
cohort, we're gonna raise up Ed Cabell. We're gonna thank him for his mentorship from beyond. And even though our doctor left us for Tehalachia, we thank Dr. Turner too for his support and
All right,
mentorship.
lady. Hey, I'll be in touch, ladies. I mean, this
Love y'all.
is so wonderful to see these connections that we never knew existed. It's just awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Fain. Thank you so much. I know you keep telling me. I thank you for bringing us together, Amope. Thank you, Dr. Fain, for allowing me to work with you and to thank you just to both of you.
And I want you all to know that we represent 3 distinct, separate generations of people.
Well, I'm
working
62,
together.
so I guess I'm in between.
You how old did you say?
I'm
62?
Yes.
Okay, well, 2 generations. We done
Right.
and Jessica ain't as young as she looked.
43
I thought maybe she was 26.
You are young. You are young,
43
lady.
is the new 33.
No,
I
no,
think.
you young.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, we know that the 60 is the new 40, so yeah, that's true.
You are young.
Thank you all for joining in this effort. I will be eternally grateful, and we got to continue this because if we don't tell it, it ain't gonna get told.
Right.
Now, is there a way that will this be linked somewhere where folks can go back and rewatch if they weren't able to attend right after lunch? It was tough to catch a crowd right after lunch.
Yeah, it's all of those sessions have been recorded. I listened to Blacks in Appalachia last night, which was recorded a month ago. So they are all archived. And those who weren't here can find it and come back to here. Okay. All right.
Well, I look forward to speaking with you guys. Let me know what I can do, when I can do it, and thank you for letting me be along for the.
I'm gonna let you all know that I'm about to write me up some grants to the Ohio Art Council. And
Ohio Humanities as well. She said we need to start submitting to. I've already had people from Chesapeake and Proctorville school system asking, can we provide help with the Black History unit? And I can't speak on behalf of you guys, and so I wanted
to. Can. Oh, yes, you can too.
I mean, they want help, and so if you can get that grant and write yourself into that grant to help them develop curriculum, then let's, they can take the research, talk with you, and
because I've been with the Ohio Art Council since 1989, spreading this word and talking about Ironton, Lawrence County, Macedonia, Providence.
And
so it's not going to be difficult. And now that we have the ability to talk long distance, see each other, and not have to pay for that,
right,
we can create a whole new reality for the region. I'm looking at this as a tourism incubator,
right?
And it does matter to me which side of the river the church winds up on as an artifact. But what's more important is the preservation of the story and the significance of its impact in the region.
Yeah.
And for that, I can concede some things. But
that church ain't going
I
anywhere.
grew up going to summer what they call the Providence Summer Religious Institute every summer of my life from 13 till I graduated high school.
Really?
Yes, I got the card still to prove that I was in attendance and passed.
That's just
I
amazing.
can stand up and recite all the covenants and all the things, you know.
It's just amazing.
And so that whole phenomena of empowerment,
Yeah.
when nothing else empowered us, you couldn't go to college. Maybe the church sponsored you to go to West Virginia State. Maybe the church sponsored you to go to Wilberforce. But that whole phenomena of what Providence did for turning me into a public speaker,
Yeah.
turning me into a scholar, imbuing that history in me and making me feel accountable, living with my father as the moderator for decades,
Yeah.
knowing
Yeah.
Reverend Gods and all them people. I didn't know Ivy Bryant because by the time I come along, he was
Oh,
gone.
yeah. Gone.
But
Yeah.
they invoked them people's names every
Yeah.
summer,
Wow.
just like we do in African-oriented ceremony when we invoke ancestors. So I got much more from the experience of being a child in Providence
Yes.
then I can't even explain it all. I'm just at the place where I can. And you know, if I fall down, I'm gonna be 60.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I mean I'm gonna be 70.
70.
And
Yeah.
to know that I was rooted, planted, and nourished
Yes.
on
Yes.
that landscape by those people, because my folks chose to migrate just a little bit more north than where they were. The opportunities that gave, I would not be able to speak well in public if it hadn't been for the training I got in Providence.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
So one day I'm gonna sit down and write that whole thing.
There you go. You better.
Well, also one last thing before I forget, and I know we have to go, but someone also mentioned on one of the calls the other day, the senator's office might put us in touch with Smithsonian to take the documents and archive the documents. So, I mean,
Wow.
if we
Wow.
talk to the Smithsonian and we're in that, if we can get Macedonia recognized in the African American history of
In
African
American
American
history, because
Museum.
African Americans know about Providence.
Sure. Sure.
Well, Smithsonian, you know what I mean? I
That's a
don't
whole
know.
nother
Because
level.
I've done work with and for the Smithsonian, and I
Okay.
do know what that means. Yes,
Yes.
ma'am, I do.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
So we'll get there.
Okay.
We'll
Yes.
get there. And
All right,
just
ladies.
when the two of us are banging on the tambourines in the heavenly land, we want you to invoke our names and keep our memories alive. That's going to be your job. You understand what I'm saying to you? I'm about to shed tears because I'm telling you the truth.
Okay.
It's you pay attention.
I'm
'Cause
paying attention.
if things work the way they work, you're going to be the last one left on the landscape that really knows the story.
And just tell me I want to learn. Keep telling me and keep connecting with me.
We're going to use you as a repository because we're going to
Yes.
count on you to continue this effort after we's worm filled.
You know it, and that's why I'm here.
Yes.
And I know I might seem pushy because I'm like, I'm here. What
Nah,
can
girl,
I do? But
you
You
just
all
a
right.
new age girl. That's all. We
Right.
good. We
You're all
good.
right.
We good.
We love
Aren't
the
we,
passion.
Cicero?
Yes,
Ain't we
we love the
good?
passion.
That's right. That's
Yes.
right. And we pouring into you.
Yeah.
So
All
I'm
right.
going to do everything I can.
thank you all for your time. Thank you
It,
for
Thank
this
it was
you.
a pleasure,
entertainment and this
ladies.
conversation.
It was a
Thank you
pleasure.
guys so much. Thank
Okay.
you.
Enjoy
Okay.
the rest of the day, okay?
Be in touch.
Okay.
Yes.
Well,
Farewell.
bye-bye.
Be well. Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure.